Okay, I've got us recording now. Thank you so much. See, we're figuring out this technology as we go. Wanted to give you a little introduction to myself for those of you who don't know me, and I saw one of my neighbors is on there, so she definitely knows me. But my background, I am the livestock agent, like I mentioned. So I am a horse and cow girl primarily. My undergraduate degree is from the University of Florida in animal sciences, specializing in the equine industry. So I was kind of that weird horse girl that never really grew out of it. And I have a master's degree in animal nutrition, specifically focused on ruminant nutrition. So I know a whole lot about cow stomachs. And I love talking animal nutrition with folks. So in my natural habitat, there I am with the horse and my dog, Annabelle. And then the voice that you hear that reminded me to record is one of our lovely assistants in this office, helping to keep me straight. That's Miss Wanda. So she's been sending out some of the emails that you guys have seen, and she will periodically be stepping in to voice some of your questions for you. And this is part of a series. This is a little logo I put together for our series, but the extension agents that I work with in this office, in an effort to produce content for you guys and meet some of your needs, we thought it would be cool to put together kind of a virtual series that focuses on growing your own food, because that's something that has been of an interest to folks, both because they have more time at home where they're thinking about doing this, and also just an interest in getting back to the land and in watching their food budget and issues related to food security. So backyard chickens, we thought, fit really well into that, and that was an area that I could step in and help to teach. So normally, some of you may have been to my Chicken University class. That's my normal backyard chicken class that I do, and it normally takes about 2 hours. I have tried to squash this down to about 45 minutes or less. So we are going to be skimming the basics of the basics. We're going to be just dipping our toe into backyard chicken keeping. And really, even with the 2-hour class, is just giving you a jumping off point to ask questions. There are folks who get their entire degrees in poultry husbandry. There are people who have PhDs in poultry husbandry. So this is a really in-depth topic, and there is no way that I can cover everything that you need to know in order to be successful keeping chickens in 45 minutes or 2 hours or even an entire semester. But what we have done is Wanda is sending out or has sent out an email with a lot of additional reading material for you. So these are all online links. So everything that we're covering here today, I'm going to give you a little introduction, and then there's a lot more in-depth reading that you can do. All of the links that we've sent you are from primarily university sources, so they're reputable research-backed sources and good information that will be useful to you. I will also provide my own email address at the last screen here, so as you read over this stuff, if you have additional questions or questions specific to your situation that you would like addressed, you're welcome to reach out to me in that way, and I would be delighted to help you. So today, what we're going to cover, excuse me, gotta wet my whistle. What we're gonna cover is some questions that I think are important to ask before you get started. And some of you may already have backyard chickens, and that's great if you do. But some of you may be just kind of thinking about getting them. And I think it's really important before you get into it to think through some of these things. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, after taking your chicken class, I decided I don't want to have chickens. And that I took as a compliment, honestly, because if I can talk someone out of an idea that is not the right fit for them, then to me that's a success. I would rather someone know on the front end that it is not right for them, as opposed to spending a lot of time and money and energy and then doing something that they regret. So we're going to talk about some questions that you guys should be asking before you get started. Then, assuming that you still do want to move forward with having chickens, we're going to talk about how to go about selecting and sourcing your birds. So what kind of chickens you should be looking for and where to purchase them. We're going to talk about housing, so what kind of coops you might want to think about constructing. A little bit of health and nutrition. And again, I could spend a ton of time on nutrition, but we will keep it pretty brief. And then egg production, because most of you are here because you're interested in keeping backyard chickens for egg production. It's hard to talk about egg production without talking about reproduction. So we will be touching on that just a little bit, more on the birds section of the birds and bees. And then also, if you have more eggs than you can eat and are interested in getting into the egg producing business, what are some avenues for you to do that legally? All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. I always like to start my chicken classes with this kind of neat graphic. This is from 1918, so 102 years ago now. And it kind of speaks to the idea that everything old is new again, but it says, Uncle Sam expects you to keep hens and raise chickens. 2 hens in the backyard for each person in the house will keep a family and fresh eggs. So we often thought of backyard chickens as kind of being a trend in the late 2000s, 2010s, but it's definitely been a trend way before that as well. People have just kind of gotten back into the mode of wanting to have something in their backyard that could make them breakfast. And this, you know, if you look at the timing of this, this was during the Spanish influenza outbreak or right before it, and World War I was going on. So folks were struggling with some of the same issues that we're facing today. And there was an increased interest in food security and having those backyard chickens. So I think it's just kind of interesting to see that cyclical thing come around again. But I think one of the most important questions you need to ask yourself, and this seems kind of silly, but super important question is, why do you want chickens? Is this an impulse buy that they seem cute? You saw chicks at Tractor Supply. You saw a cute coop on Pinterest and you thought it might be fun to have chickens. Do you want chickens because you're wanting to produce eggs for your own family? Are you wanting chickens because you want to go into egg production as a business? Are you wanting to raise meat for your family? Are you wanting to do a 4-H project? So all of those will kind of inform a lot of the other decisions that you're going to make down the road. And then the other really important question to ask is, are you allowed to keep chickens? And that answer can vary quite a bit depending on where you live. So depending on where you live in the county and depending on which city you live in, there are different rules that govern whether or not you're allowed to keep backyard chickens. And if so, how many you're allowed to have. So some municipalities say no backyard chickens at all. Some will allow you to have some, but limit the numbers. Typically, they will limit backyard chickens to only hens. And that's because hens tend to be quiet. They're not cock-a-doodle-doing. They tend not to be aggressive. And you don't need a rooster to have eggs. And we'll talk about why that is when we get to that egg production section. But there's really no need to have a rooster unless you're trying to produce baby chicks. And then there may be also additional restrictions that you need to consider, things like how far set back does the coop have to be from your property lines? Even if within your municipality you're allowed to keep chickens, your HOA may prohibit you from having them. And then I think it's also, you know, have a discussion with your neighbors as well. Even if you are allowed to keep chickens and your municipality allows you to and your HOA allows you to, it might be something to, you know, good fences make good neighbors, and have that conversation and make sure that your neighbors are excited about farm fresh eggs and not going to be causing a neighborhood feud. Another important question to ask is, do you have time to care for chickens? So these are not house plants. They're not something that you can care for occasionally. They are living creatures that require daily care, and you can't skip a day. So this is something to think about your schedule, especially for those of you who may be working from home or temporarily out of work because of the situation that we're in. Is this something that when you return to your normal schedule in the future, is this something that your schedule will accommodate? Another thing along those same lines is, who is going to care for your animals when you're on vacation or working late? So, you know, if I'm on vacation or working late and I need to let my dogs out, I can call a neighbor to do that, or I can take my dog with me on vacation. But, you know, if you need to put your chickens up in the coop at night and you want to go out to dinner, do you have a plan for that? Do you have a farm sitter in mind who can take care of your chickens? These are all just considerations to consider before you take the leap. Another thing to think about is, are you prepared to handle sick animals? There are avian vets who do practice medicine on chickens. I am not one of them, but they are few and far between. So oftentimes we have to practice some of our own healthcare on animals. So are you prepared to do some of that and learn how to do some of the basic healthcare that your chicken might need? And then another important question is, what are you going to do when your chickens stop laying eggs? Chickens have a relatively long lifespan in proportion to their productive life. And what I mean by that is that they can live for 8 to 10 years, and they will drop off on their egg production fairly significantly after the first couple of years. And so you may have a situation where you have a flock of hens in your backyard that are not giving you very many eggs at all. You may have originally got these chickens because you wanted to have farm fresh eggs, and your city prohibits you from having more than 3 hens. So what are you going to do? Do you have a plan for rehoming those chickens after they stop laying eggs? Are you going to keep them on as pets? Are you going to turn them into chicken soup? These are all just things to consider. There are a couple of businesses now. I know there's one in Orlando that does a rent-a-chicken program where they will, you get the hens, and then when the hens stop laying, they take them back and give you new ones. So there are some businesses that will work with that. But the only option that I think is not an option is letting them go. And we have seen that happen in some places where people, the hens stop laying and they want to get new hens, so they just drive the hens out in the country and open the door and kick them out. And that is an unacceptable way to handle that. So you got to think about other options for what to do with your chickens when they stop paying rent. All right, so let's assume that you answered all those questions in such a way that make you think you still want to have chickens. Let's talk about where you're going to get these chickens from. So one of the first things you need to think about is, what breed of chicken do you want? And there are actually more than 400 breeds of chickens available, and some of them are pretty wild looking. I think we're all used to seeing kind of the traditional Leghorns and Rhode Island Reds and Wyandottes and some of the more popular breeds. But if you look at some of the heritage breeds that are available, there are some really interesting looking chickens breeds out there. So, and they all have kind of different personalities and different characteristics, and they really depend on what your goal is. So if you're wanting to raise chickens for meat, you're going to want to look for what we call a broiler breed. These are typically Cornish cross, like a Cornish rock cross, and they have been bred over the years to develop muscling very quickly. So they're capable of really good feed conversion. That means that they're really efficient in taking what we feed them and turning that into muscle, and muscle creates the tissue that we end up eating, the meat that we eat. So in intensive production, which means that they're on a pretty heavy feeding system, they can go from hatching to being ready to eat in as little as 6 weeks. In a free range situation where they're doing more foraging and moving around and raised less intensively, you're looking at more of a closer to a 14-week process, but that's still a pretty quick turnover from egg to chicken that you can eat, and that is for those broiler breeds. If you're really interested more in laying and getting eggs, you're going to want to look for a breed that is known for heavy egg laying. Those would be things like the white leghorn. Those are known for being heavy egg layers. If you like brown eggs, you may want to consider a Rhode Island Red or a red sex link. Those are all breeds that are heavy producers that lay a brown shelled egg. There are also what we call dual purpose breeds. Those are breeds that don't grow as rapidly as the Cornish crosses, and they don't lay as reliably as the laying breeds, but they can do both pretty well. So if you wanted to keep a flock that maybe you were raising chicks and you raised the males for eating and the females you kept for egg laying, you may want to look for a dual purpose breed like a Plymouth Rock. And then there are also chicken shows. So, and chicken shows can be pretty competitive. And if you ever get a chance to go to one, they're something to behold. So all sorts of different breeds, and people get very into it. It can be really rewarding to see the results of your genetics and your selection, and pretty interesting. So lots of different cool breeds available out there, and that's really kind of a personal choice. There is a website, and I did not include it on your list, but I can certainly send it out if anyone's interested. It's called the American Livestock Conservancy, and it looks at breeds that are considered endangered, and those can be really interesting to get involved with as well. So these are breeds that maybe need some preservation breeders, which might be something that you're interested in. All right, so let's talk about where you can get these chicks from. So one option is to start with fertile eggs and hatch them yourself. And I'm going to break each of these down into kind of pros and cons, because as an extension agent, my job is not to tell you what to do. That's my job as a mom and a wife. But my job is to help you guys make educated decisions. So we're going to tell you the pros and cons of each, and then you guys can make your own choices. So pros, it is a really cool science experiment. It takes 21 days from the time that the egg begins incubating until it's ready to hatch. We actually do a 4-H embryology project that is done in the school system. And it's really neat because you can actually see the embryo develop inside the shell. We do something called candling, where we shine a bright light through the egg in a dark room, and you can see the blood vessels start to form. You can see when the heart starts beating. It is really, really neat. And I used to have a job working at a horse farm and delivering baby horses. And I don't care how many times you see new life come into the world and what kind of new life it is, it's always cool and amazing. And the same goes for baby chicks. So it's really exciting when those eggs start peeping and you start to see the little tiny babies come out. Another pro is that your birds are going to be hopefully healthy and have a long productive life, because you're getting them at literally the very beginning of their life. But that is assuming that they hatch. And that brings us to the cons. So mama birds come with their own special equipment. They're well designed to sit on the eggs and hold them at the right temperature and humidity, but we need special equipment to do that. So we need incubators to do that. And incubators can fail in a number of different ways. I have incubated, I don't know how many clutches of eggs in my years as an extension agent, and I tend to use the same procedure every time, and I have had wildly different outcomes. So sometimes I'll have the entire clutch hatch. Other times I have the entire clutch fail, and I've had everything in between. It can also be difficult sometimes to find fertile eggs. And oftentimes your eggs may be subfertile. So you may think you have fertile eggs, you put them in the incubator, and then when you go to candle them and check them, some of them may have started developing and others failed to develop, or some of them may have started developing and then stopped at some point. You may lose some or all of your eggs. So if something goes wrong in the incubation, you lose power, and the incubator turns off when you didn't realize it, or the humidity gets off. Someone knocks the top off. A number of things can go wrong that can cause you to lose your hatch. Also, statistically, you're going to get 50-50 males and females. And if you're not looking for roosters, that can be an issue, because now you've got a lot of little boy birds you got to figure out what to do with. It's also going to be a relatively long time from the time you put those eggs in the incubator until you can enjoy your first omelet from your hens. So you're looking at it at least 5 months to 6 months from the time that you start incubating that egg until you start getting eggs from those hens. So you got to be patient. You could also start with young chicks. So a big pro to me for that is baby chicks. Baby animals of all kinds are pretty darn cute. You can also be pretty sure that the birds are healthy depending on where you get them from, and that they're going to have a long, productive life. The cons is that they also do require special housing, and that's because they're pretty sensitive to changes in temperature. So you have to provide them with an environment that is warm through the use of a heat lamp. We call those brooders. Baby chicks are also very delicate. So they have to be handled very carefully and protected in those early days. If you get straight run chicks, that means that they have not been sexed early on. You are going to get some roosters and some females. And sexing baby chicks is actually fairly difficult to do. It's not as easy. They all have a cloaca, so you can't look at the genitalia to see if it is a male or female. You have to look at certain feathering patterns. It's not something that I'm able to do. And And so if you are ordering a straight run, you're going to get 50-50 males and females on average.
Meg, we have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Which breeds do best in Florida heat and are good layers?
I think I don't know that there's a huge difference in the heat tolerance, to be honest. The best laying breeds are going to be your white leghorns and Rhode Island Reds, the red sex link. Those are going to be the heaviest laying breeds. No chickens love the heat about as much as I do, which is not very much. So we do have to provide them with some shade and access to water, and they tend to go off their feet a little bit in the summertime, and we'll talk about that when we get to egg production troubleshooting. But there's not necessarily any breed that I'm aware of that is more well adapted to the heat than others. And I may be wrong on that, and if I am, I will send you guys an email and correct myself. So, but good question. And again, with the chicks, you're looking at a couple months before you're going to start getting eggs. So that's another con. This is some of the equipment that I was telling you about. So over here, this is and hopefully you can see my cursor. This is an incubator. So this one has an automatic turner because those eggs need to be turned 2 to 3 times a day. And the less you can open the top, the better. So this actually keeps it and rotates them for you. And so that goes on here, the top goes on there, it stays at a constant temperature and humidity, and that tray just kind of slowly rotates during the day. And then this is the brooder that the chicks would go in for the first couple of weeks. So it's got a heat lamp to provide them a nice source of heat. Another option is to start with pullets. Pullets are young females that they're kind of in that awkward teenage stage, so not yet started laying. Pros of this is that you're getting them right at the start of their productive life. So they have their chickhood is behind them and they are ready to start laying. So it is almost omelet time for you. Cons, this is probably the most expensive, hardest to find because someone else has done the hard work of raising these birds for you. So you're going to pay a premium for that. The other issue is that, you know, this is an animal that's been raised elsewhere, so they could be bringing whatever pathogens from where they were raised with them to your farm. So whenever you bring new animals onto your property, we always recommend you quarantine for a minimum of 10 days, preferably 2 weeks. And that allows any pathogens that that animal is carrying but not showing to go ahead and manifest so that they're not bringing any disease onto your property and infecting your existing animals. Wanda, I think you're still unmuted, my dear. All right, the other option is to start with hens. So these would be adults. Pros here is that you can be pretty sure that they're all female at that point. So that can definitely be a pro. Big cons, a lot of cons here. One is that you could be buying somebody else's problem. So remember we talked about how birds have a relatively long lifespan in relation to their productive life. So if someone else has had their bird for 3 or 4 years and it's not laying very much anymore, and they're trying to offload it on somebody, you could be the one showing up to take those birds. So you might be taking a bird that's transitioning into retirement and you may not get many eggs. You may also be getting a sick bird. So this may be a bird that someone knows is sick, or it's just not on purpose, but is bringing pathogens from someone else's farm. So I would always advise, if you are getting adult hens, to proceed with extreme caution. Folks do this sometimes, especially within show communities. They may be bringing new genetics in, and they're doing it with a good education behind it. So they're being very careful about quarantining those animals and getting them from health tested flocks. I have also seen the flip side of that, where people have had their heartstrings pulled at and bought a pathetic looking bird in a small cage at a flea market because they felt sorry for it, brought it home, turned it out with their chickens, and 2 weeks later, all of their animals were dead. And that was a devastating loss for them. So you just want to be extremely, extremely cautious if you find yourself in this situation of taking new animals onto your property. Just quarantine, quarantine, quarantine. And that means also doing things like handling your original birds first and then handling the new birds. Don't share equipment in between them, washing your hands, just being incredibly careful with those sort of things. All right, let's talk about housing. Coops need not be elaborate, although they certainly can be. And I think we'll see, I have on the next slide, I believe I've got some pictures of some of the ways that that can be incredibly elaborate. But they do need to provide protection from the elements. And in Florida, the elements are primarily heat, so they need to have a source of shade and rain, so roof as well. They need to provide protection from predators, and there are a lot of things that like chicken. That ranges from snakes, raccoons, possums, owls, hawks, loose neighborhood dogs, coyotes, bears. So you really have to think about what may be in your area that could be attracted to your chickens. Typically what we find is that with predators, it's really the chicken feed that attracts them initially. They smell the chicken feed, they come to that, and then they stay for the chicken. So if you are really good about maintaining good sanitation in your coop and keeping your feed in an airtight container and in an inaccessible area, it's a lot easier to deter predators from becoming a problem in the first place than to scare them off once they get established. Once they have learned that your house is an all-you-can-eat chicken buffet, it can be really difficult to discourage them. You may want to provide a source of light, and I put a question mark there, and I'm going to answer that question mark when we get to reproduction, so hold that question in your mind. Super important that it be well ventilated. Chickens have a really, really delicate respiratory system. All birds do. Their respiratory system is very different than ours. You guys have probably heard about the canary in the coal mine. And the reason coal miners would use them is that the canary would fall over, pass out or die, either one, when the air quality got bad before the miners ever knew that there was a problem. And that's because they were much more sensitive. So birds are a lot more sensitive to air quality issues. So if we don't provide them good ventilation, they can get a lot of respiratory problems. So super important that we keep good hygiene in the coop and we allow for good air movement. And we also want it to be easy to access, both for the birds, but also for us. And the reason I say for us is, you know, A, we're going to be getting eggs out of there, but also if it's easy for us to access, we're going to be a lot more likely to keep it clean. If it's something that's difficult to get to, I know myself, I'm going to be more likely to put off cleaning it as part of a normal chore. Typically, chickens are going to be out in a run during the day and up at night to roost. So this is an example of a little commercially available house that would be suitable for 1 or 2 birds. And there's a couple things that I like about it. And this could be purchased as a kit, but there's plenty of plans that are available online as well. And like I said, on the next slide, we've got some good examples or coming up in a couple slides. But a couple things we like about this one. It's got nice galvanized fox-proof mesh. So I don't like actual chicken wire because the gaps are too big in it. Snakes can get in and out of that really easily, and raccoons can stick their little paws through it too easily. But that wire mesh will not allow predators through. It's got a good waterproof roof. Up here in this little barn area for them to roost in at night, you could actually pull up their little bridge if you want at night and close them up. So even if a predator at night were to get into this area, they have double protection by being up in their little house. The nest box where they're hopefully going to be laying their eggs is really easy for us to get to, so we can get eggs out without having to get our backs bent out of shape. And then this tray right here makes cleaning really a breeze. So I can pull that tray out and do a kind of a daily cleaning in addition to hopefully my regular deep cleanings. Space requirements. This is a question we get a lot. How much space do chickens need? I don't think there is such a thing as too much space for them, but there is such a thing as too little space. So typically what we found is that they do best if they have about 3 square feet per chicken of floor space. And that's in their, when they're in their coop. When they're out and about, 8 to 10 square feet per animal in an outdoor run seems to be enough to cut down on aggression and allow them enough room to exercise and practice natural behaviors. You also want to allow them access to food and water with about 2 to 3 linear inches per animal. So what that would mean is that if I'm offering a tray of food, I allow about this much space of food per animal, and that way not one bossy hen can block access to food for the rest of the birds that are out there. Also 6 to 9 inches of perch space per animal, and then about 1 nest box for every 5 hens, so they can share. And nest box can be about a 12 by 12 by 12 box. This is the back of that coop that I just showed you. So you can see there's the nest box area. It's got nice hay in there to keep the eggs nice and clean. But you can use a milk crate. There's a number of different ways to make a nest box. And the hens will be naturally attracted to and encouraged to lay in that area. So one question that we do get an awful lot is, what about free range? So again, there's pros and cons to free ranging your hens. The pros is that it does allow for natural behaviors. So they do enjoy foraging. They are omnivores by nature, so they like picking up bugs and grubs. They are allowed to eat a diversified diet when they're out foraging, and they'll actually do you some help sometimes by consuming some of the pests that may live in your yard that you don't want. They also, on the opposite end of things, will spread fertilizer for you. So chicken manure is very high in nitrogen and can make a really good soil amendment, especially if you compost it first. So we talked about how important it is to clean out the coop on a regular basis. I would not let that waste go to waste. So adding that to your compost as an amendment can make your soil very high quality for using in your garden. The big cons is that when they're out and about, they're not protected from predators. So you will lose some birds if you choose to free range them. And predators can come from the ground and they can come from the sky. The other issue is that they can stray. So especially if you're in a situation where you're living in a neighborhood that allows backyard chickens, your chickens may not respect property boundaries that are arbitrary. So they will not stay in your yard necessarily. And that may or may not annoy your neighbors. They may stray into the road, which could be unsafe for them, and they may start laying their eggs places that you wish they would not. So all of those can be issues. But there is a compromise, and those are mobile coops, or something we call chicken tractors, and these are pretty cool. Here's 2 examples. This one on top is I would call a chicken tractor, and the one underneath is more of a mobile coop. But these are able to be moved around a yard, and so it kind of combines the best of both. It allows them to move, so you can move this around your property so they get access to fresh grass, fresh grubs, they get to move around a little bit while still getting protection from predators and having their movement restricted to where you want them. So this allows you to kind of rotate them around your yard, and these have become a really popular alternative to just outright free ranging. This is a picture of a couple different options for chicken coops. So on the bottom here, we've got kind of a chicken tractor, or on the top here is a chicken tractor that has been built pretty simply. It has an area where they can go in and get out of the elements still, but this can be simply moved around a yard. Here's a more elaborate chicken tractor that maybe takes a little bit more effort to move. It's a big chicken with a chicken coop with a built-in run that could accommodate a fairly large flock. Underneath that, this would be a commercial free-range flock, so this is quite large. Thought this one was pretty cute in the middle. So you can see some people really go all out and make their coops awful elaborate, and I think some of them are nicer decorated than my house. And then this one kind of cracked me up a little bit. They converted a TARDIS, so I'm assuming it's bigger on the inside, but they've converted that into a little chicken coop as well. So you could be quite creative and make your chicken coop match your house. You can kind of make it blend in pretty well, and I've seen some really cool ideas online. All right, so let's talk a little bit about health. And like I said, I am not a veterinarian, and we are going to kind of go past this section fairly quickly, but on your resources, there is a link that talks about common animal or common poultry diseases and the signs for each of them. So I would definitely read this closely and make sure you kind of become familiar with what the common symptoms are for different diseases. But when we think about chickens, you have to remember that they are prey animals. So what that means in terms of their health is that they're not going to advertise that they're sick until they're pretty much on death's door. If they did that, that's kind of like waving a big red flag to any predator that might be in the area that I'm weak, please come eat me. So they really try to hide that they're not feeling well and try to tough it out. That said, when you pay attention, you will notice signs. And if you can pick up on those signs early, you have a much better chance of intervening and saving that animal, but also being able to separate them from the flock and protect the rest of your animals from getting sick. So it's really on you as the backyard chicken keeper to know your animals and know what's normal so that you can react when something abnormal is happening. So pay attention to how much your animals are normally eating and drinking. When they go off food, that can sometimes be the first sign of an animal not feeling well. So when you put food out, if they all normally come running and you notice that one hen is hanging back, that's kind of a big red flag to you that something might not be okay with that chicken, and you need to start paying close attention. Pay attention to activity. So if one is starting to act kind of listless and not roaming around with her flock. To posture as well. Sometimes when they don't feel well, you'll see them kind of puff their feathers out a little bit and kind of pull their neck in and kind of stand with kind of like an arched back look. And maybe their eyes half closed. They look like they're not feeling well. And then as gross as it is, pay attention to poop. What comes out of the animal can tell us a lot about what's going on inside the animal. So changes to the consistency or color or odor of fecal matter can really tell us a lot about that animal's health status. Like I said, read over that document that we sent with all of the common symptoms of different avian diseases. And then know what diseases are reportable, and those are listed as well. And what reportable means is that there are some avian diseases that are incredibly contagious and could devastate the poultry industry. So, you as a backyard chicken keeper may have 2 or 3 hens, and if they get sick and die of something, it's a loss for you personally, and it's sad, but it's not an economic devastating loss. For other places, if a farmer is, a big production farm, may have hundreds of thousands of chickens and employing, hundreds of workers. And if that same disease gets onto their property, it could wipe out everything. So these reportable diseases are diseases that the state veterinarian is monitoring. Things like avian influenza is one example. So if one of those reportable diseases shows up, you're obligated to report it to the state veterinarian, and there is the 800 number listed on that resource sheet. You are not in trouble if that disease shows up on your property at all. They just want to know so that they can put things in place to protect that bigger producer, so that, or protect everybody, but also, make sure that issue that starts in a backyard flock doesn't get into the commercial poultry industry and cause major problems. Wanda, do we have a question? I see something popping up. Let's see. She said she didn't receive any materials. They are coming. If they're not in your email yet, Wanda will be sending them. So they'll be coming.
I sent them. So Barbara, check your email because I did send them.
Okay. So it's an email with a bunch of links. So if you don't see it, send her an email and she'll get it to you. FDAX also keeps on their website, and there's a link to this in the material as well, animal disease updates. So and these are for all the different species of livestock, but whenever there is sort of an outbreak, they keep producers up to date on that and things that are emerging, and they're doing a real good job of tracking these things. Always a good idea to practice good biosecurity. And biosecurity is kind of a fancy word for any of the practices that we do to keep pathogens from coming onto our property. So that would be things like when you go to see your friend's chickens and you're handling them and you come back to your own property, don't go immediately out to go handle your chickens because you could, without meaning to, be a vector of disease. So change your clothes, spray the bottom of your boots with the bleach solution, use care if you're bringing a new bird onto your property and doing quarantining, removing sick birds from your flock if you notice one bird getting sick. All of those are practices that you can do to reduce the spread of illness, and that's what we call biosecurity. And then establishing a relationship with the veterinarian. So if you are going to have these birds more as pets and you're going to be working with a veterinarian, finding an avian veterinarian and establishing that relationship before it's an emergency can be helpful, so that you know who to call and who to work with. Come on screen. And then another thing that we have to consider with health is our own health. Chickens can have pathogens on their bodies and in their droppings. So things like salmonella is a big one, even when they appear to be clean. And the CDC has actually noticed a pretty big uptake in salmonella outbreaks that have been linked to backyard poultry. And that's because sometimes when we have backyard chickens, we handle them without thinking about the fact that they themselves could be spreading disease. So I don't want you to be afraid of your chickens, but do make sure that you're washing your hands with soap and water after handling, and pay close attention, especially to children. So little kids will go out and play with the chickens and then go and eat their peanut butter and jelly sandwich and could get very, very ill. And salmonella can be deadly. So we just want to make it a good practice of washing hands. I never thought I'd have to say this in a chicken class, but I had to start saying it a couple of years ago. Please don't kiss your chickens. So they actually link some of the outbreaks to backyard chicken owners kissing their chickens and getting salmonella on their lips. So I put there, love your chickens with limits. So don't kiss your chickens. And then practicing good food safety with the eggs that you get from your chickens. And we will not get into that today, although there are some good links again in the resources, partly because that is an entire other discussion. But you know, you're bringing anything that you can do to keep the pathogens from coming in your house, and being careful is extremely important. All right, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about nutrition. And like I said, I could talk an entire class about nutrition because that's what my degree is in, and it's my favorite. But chickens, as birds, do have a very unique digestive system. So they have a gizzard, which is a mechanical stomach that uses the muscle to grind up the food, and the proventriculus, which is their chemical stomach that uses chemicals to break down the food. They have a pair of ceca, which is a fermentation vat that allows them to take advantage of some of the fibrous material that we can't get energy out of. And then their intestines are very short, and that's because their entire system is built around the idea that they're birds and that in theory they could fly. So they don't want to be weighed down with a whole lot of waste matter. So things process through their system fairly quickly, and they don't spend a whole lot of time in the intestines. We recommend that you feed a complete, and that means it has all the nutrients that they need, age-appropriate feed to meet their needs without unbalancing the diet. And what we mean by that is that when you go to the feed store, they have different types of feed that will have different names based on the age of the animals that it's intended for. So for baby chicks, 0 to 6 weeks of age, they will get what we call a starter diet. And that starter diet is going to be very high in crude protein, and that's how we measure the protein equivalent of the diet. And that's because they are growing a tremendous amount at that age. So to go from baby chicks to awkward teenagers takes a lot of energy, and they're building a lot of muscle. So that's, they're gonna need 20 to 24% crude protein in order to get that done. Then from 6 to 18 weeks, they're going to go on what we call a grower diet. So we back off a little bit on the crude protein, although they still do have a higher crude protein need than adults. Some mills, some feed companies will make a combo. So you may see a starter grower, and that's perfectly fine too. So there'll be a crude protein that's closer to that 20% and will meet both of the needs. Then when they get to 18 weeks and older, this is when they're going to transition into being hens and laying eggs. At that point, crude protein needs go down quite a bit. So we back them off to 14 to 16%, but calcium needs go up quite a bit. So they're going to need 3.5 to 4% calcium. And that's because the eggshells are made out of calcium. If we do not provide enough calcium in the diet, they can actually mobilize the calcium that's in the medullary bone or in the medullary tissue in their bone for a certain period of time. And then they'll actually can end up in a calcium deficiency situation that can be very dangerous. So we want to make sure that they have high calcium. The danger here is that we want to make sure that our layers have high calcium, not the babies and not the roosters, because high calcium for animals that don't need it can result in other issues like calcium deposits in soft tissue and in the heart. Another question we get a lot is, what about grit, and what's the difference between calcium and grit? So calcium is a mineral that's soluble. That means they break it down and they absorb it. It's metabolized and they use it for those eggshells. Calcium is part of a complete feed, but in the summertime here when it's really hot, chickens may back off a little bit on their feed. I know I personally am not a hot weather person, and during the summer I always am a little leaner than during the winter because I'm just not hungry because I'm hot, and I think chickens feel the same way. So you may have to supplement calcium if they're not eating enough food. So if you start to notice some soft shells in your egg, you can offer free choice calcium on the side as a supplement, and they will have that during hot weather. Grit is insoluble. It's basically little pieces of rocks, and those are in the gizzard that help with mechanical digestion. So it helps with the breakdown of food. Typically the commercial feed, so the pellets that we feed them, those are so highly soluble and digestible that they really don't need grit to be broken down. You can offer grit, but it's not necessary. If your birds are out foraging and they're picking up all sorts of other things, they may need supplemental grit, but they may also pick up some of their own supplemental grit in the form of little pebbles and whatnot. But you can offer grit on the side as well as a supplement. Question we get also is, what about the roosters? So what if you have roosters in with your hens, and I've just told you not to feed your hens or your non-hens too much calcium. So you can keep the roosters either on a grower feed, so they do fine on that grower feed their whole life, or you can feed an all flock blended feed that will meet the needs of both the hens and the roosters, and then feed the supplemental calcium on the side that the hens will go to and the roosters won't. We also get questions sometimes. Go ahead, Wanda.
You have a question. She says 6 weeks ago, a 6-week-old chick aren't interested in anything except crumbles. I read that they like kitchen scraps and mealworms. At what point can these things be introduced, and is it safe to do so?
Yes, absolutely. We will get to chicken scraps in just a minute. And no, you do not. I just saw the other question pop up. You do not need to keep them separated, although you can if you don't want to have baby chicks, if you're afraid you'll miss an egg. So you can feed your whole flock that all flock blended feed, and then just offer the calcium as a separate supplement, and the hens will typically go to it and the roosters won't. And we'll get to the supplements and the scratch and everything in just a second. But for medicated feeds, chickens can be prone to an infection from a protozoa called coccidiosis that causes diarrhea, amongst other things. And so a lot of starter feeds, coccidiosis typically doesn't bother adult chickens because they kind of form some immunity to it, but it can bother baby chicks quite a bit. So some of the starter feeds will contain a medication that helps to control that protozoa. It is not enough medication to treat them. So if they actually have coccidiosis, you need to get them treated for it. And it's not an antibiotic, but it is a medication that helps to prevent coccidiosis. So you may choose to feed a medicated feed. There is also a vaccine that's available for coccidiosis. And sometimes when you purchase chicks, some of those chicks will come pre-vaccinated for coccidiosis. If you feed a medicated feed, that can sometimes interfere with the vaccine. So you just want to find out when you purchase your chicks if they have been vaccinated for coccidiosis, and then you do not want to feed the medicated feed. If they have not been vaccinated, then you may want to feed the medicated feed as a preventative measure to prevent coccidiosis in young chicks. All right, supplements. This is a question we get a whole lot. And there are kind of two different classes of supplements. So there are supplements like she was talking about, kitchen table scraps. I think some table scraps are great. So things like veggies, the more the merrier. Those are high nutrient, low energy. So things like things that you would put in your compost pile, offer them to the chickens and see what they'll eat first. And that's great. There are also supplements that you can purchase. As part of the university, we only recommend things that have university research behind them. So a lot of those supplements don't necessarily have research backing. It doesn't mean that they don't work, and it doesn't mean that they're harmful or anything like that. It just means that we really don't know. So it's kind of buyer beware. So they may be helpful. They, best case scenario, they do what they're advertised to do. Worst case scenario, they could be harmful. I think most likely case scenario, they are expensive and don't do as advertised. So I always just say be cautious when you're feeding some of those miracle supplements that you can purchase, because often you see things advertised that sound too good to be true, and they may be. And again, if you're feeding a complete feed, it's meeting all of the nutrient requirements of those chickens, so you shouldn't need any additional supplements. But feeding veggie table scraps is great. Do be careful, and this is where the scratch question comes from. Corn, so people feed ground corn as like a scratch feed. Chickens love it. It is the equivalent of feeding candy to them. And chickens eat to meet their energy requirement first. So that means once they meet that requirement for calories, they'll stop eating. Corn is very high calorie for them, but it's not very high in some of the other nutrients. So it's a good source of vitamin A, and it's a good source of calories. It's not a real good source of protein, and it's not a real good source of a lot of the other micronutrients that they need. And the problem is that they fill up on corn, and then they don't want to go and eat the balanced diet. So we end up unbalancing their diet. So they're eating plenty, but they're not getting the nutrients they need. It's kind of like if you were at an all-you-could-eat buffet with your children and you let them go and get the ice cream first. They're going to fill up on that, and they're not going to go have the broccoli that you'd like them to eat. So make them eat the broccoli first, and then if you want to give them a little bit of scratch sometimes, I think that's okay. But I hear from a lot of people who say, you know, I feed my chickens scratch, and that's the only thing they'll eat now, and they won't go eat the other feed. Cut down the scratch. They will learn to eat the other feed, but as long as you're offering candy to them, they're not going to eat their broccoli. And then also with table scraps, kind of the same thing goes along. So things that are really high carbohydrate, I would be wary of, but veggies, leftover cuttings, when you're chopping up veggies and stuff, you can certainly offer those to them. There are some things that are poisonous though, that we need to be considerate of. So, you know, tomatoes, the green part of the plant is poisonous. The tomato itself is not. Onions can cause some problems. So just, and the Humane Society actually has a good, I think it's the Humane Society or ASPCA has a good listing of all of the plants that are poisonous to domestic animals. So those can certainly be looked up there. And then I think foraging, that was another question that we get a lot of as far as letting them out to eat what's in your yard. And typically, yes. There are some toxic plants though as well. And on one of the resources, the Backyard Chicken Keeping for Egg Production has a great list of a lot of the toxic plants that can be dangerous for your chickens. So I would check out your yard for those plants before you turn them loose. But certainly allowing them to forage is part of their natural behavior, and they are naturally omnivorous, and they will go after some of the bugs and grubs and enjoy that. And then I think it's also always really important to remember that water is the most important nutrient. So animals can lose almost all of their body fat and live. They won't be comfortable and they won't be pretty, but they can survive. They can lose about half of their body protein stores and survive. Again, not healthy, not comfortable, but survivable. A loss of just 10% of the body's water storage is a death sentence. And in Florida summers, it does not take very long to lose 10% of your water. Dehydration is a terrible way to go. So it is your responsibility to make sure that your chickens always have access to clean, fresh water. There are a number of watering systems that are available for chickens, and you have to check every day. Hoses get kinked, automatic waterers get broken, they knock things over, and it really doesn't take but just a day or two of checking water for an animal to dehydrate. So super important that you're on top of that. All right, let's talk about egg production and where eggs come from. Ordinarily in the class, I spend a little bit more time on this because I think it's really cool. But I always like to ask people, what do you think the most important reproductive organ in a chicken is? And they'll point to different parts. And actually the most important reproductive organ is the brain. And that's where the whole cascade of hormones that causes egg production starts. And it's all triggered by the length of daylight. So when the daylight is long enough, or when the day length is short, there is a hormone called melatonin that you guys are probably familiar with that's excreted. And when that hormone is excreted, it's kind of a big stop sign for the rest of the reproductive cycle. So in the absence of the production of melatonin, there is a cascade of hormones that happens that causes, and a hormone is just a chemical messenger that's produced in one part of the body, travels through the bloodstream to take action in another part of the body. So these hormones are produced in different parts of the brain, travel through the blood, and eventually they travel from the brain down into the reproductive organs. The hen has 2 oviducts, but only one is actually functioning at a time. So one kind of becomes rudimentary and kind of shrivels up, and one is the productive one. At the very top, let me move my little picture over here. At the very top, this is the ovary. And if you were to look at this in real life, these actually look like egg yolks, and that's basically what they are. And one of these is the most mature ovum, and it's ready to be ovulated. And so when it is ready to be ovulated, and the cascade of hormones, specifically follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone and estrogen, tell the ovary to go ahead and release that egg. That egg will then go into the infundibulum, which kind of looks like a funnel. If that hen has had some intimate time with a rooster, this is where fertilization would happen. So the egg is an ovulation, not a conception. So whether she has been exposed to a rooster or not, she will have an egg. And that's really important because there are a lot of people who think in order for a hen to lay eggs, you have to have a rooster, or that an egg is a baby chicken that never developed. It is just an ovulation. And hens can actually store sperm from a rooster in this area. They have what they call sperm nest for a number of days. So she doesn't even have to spend time with a rooster every day. And she can have, that egg can be fertilized, and tomorrow's egg can be fertilized, and so on and so forth. Then that fertilized or unfertilized ovum, the yolk, will travel down. And as it goes down, it stimulates different nerves along the reproductive tract. And in this area, the magnum, which is the first couple layers of the egg white or the albumin, are added. Then it comes down here, so all of the egg white has been added, and it gets the isthmus, it gets the, in the isthmus, it gets the membrane added. So if you were to crack open an egg and kind of peel it back without totally opening it, you'll see that there's kind of a thin membrane. So the magnum adds the albumin, then it comes down here into the isthmus and it gets that membrane added. And then it spends most of the time in the uterus or the shell gland. And this is where layer upon layer of calcium gets added to make the shell. Then it goes in through the vagina and into the cloaca. And the cloaca is the common opening of the digestive tract and the reproductive tract. So everything comes out of this one opening. The good news is that when she goes to lay the egg, there's actually a vaginal fold that covers the reproductive or the digestive tract, so that the egg should not get any fecal matter on it, ideally. So it comes out and it is laid. This whole process from the time of ovulation until that egg is laid takes about 24 hours. In general, a hen is going to start laying at about 5 months of age, but that can vary based on the time of year, their breed, how they're managed, and a number of other factors. And they cannot produce more than 1 egg a day. There are a number of weird things that can happen in this process. And if we had more time, I can see I'm already going on an hour, and I promised you guys 45 minutes. There are a number of really strange things that can happen in this process. The shell color is dependent on the breed. So different breeds have different color eggs, and you can actually tell, if you're not sure what breed your chicken is, you can tell what color their shell is going to be by looking at their earlobe. And yes, chickens do have ears, but there's a little piece of skin that's not covered by feathers back here, and the color of the earlobe will indicate the color that their eggs are going to be. Heavy layers can lay up to 300 eggs in a year. Typically, they will lay for about 50 to 60 weeks, and then they're going to go through a molt period where they rest. They lose a lot of their feathers. It's not a pretty time in their life. But we can also manage them in such a way to increase productivity. So remember that big question mark I put about lights in the barn? And that's because that whole cascade of hormone that starts and causes that ovulation, it shuts down when day length gets too short, because of melatonin. So we can actually trick the hen's brain into thinking it's an eternal summer by putting a light bulb in the hen house, and you can extend the daylight length on either side of the day by enough time to make her think it's summertime. And the light just, it doesn't have to be a special type of light. It just has to be light enough to read a newspaper by, and that will keep the egg production pretty steady throughout the year rather than having it drop off as day length shortens. So let's talk real quick about troubleshooting egg production, because I do get a lot of questions when people have issues. And they typically fall into one of two categories, and those are either odd eggs, which means the egg is, I've gotten calls the egg was a strange shape, it was a strange color, there was an egg inside of an egg, there was a blood spot in the egg. And people always, they're calling me and then they're going to call the Guinness Book of World Records because they think they've just gotten something really, really unusual. And the fact is that it probably isn't as unusual as you might think. We're used to buying eggs at the grocery store, and those eggs have all been sorted and graded, and there's a lot of eggs that end up on the cutting room floor. And so they're very intentional about selecting 12 eggs that look normal because that's what the consumer expects. So any eggs that don't meet our expectation of being normal would be sorted out. So it is somewhat normal to get the occasional odd egg, but odd eggs can also be an indication that something's wrong. So it is important to take note of it. We do see especially odd eggs early on. So those first couple of eggs that they lay will sometimes be really tiny. The other question I get is my hen has stopped laying. And there are a couple reasons that this can be, but the first thing I always ask is, are you sure that they have actually stopped laying? Because they may be laying, but someone may be getting to those eggs before you can. So there could be snakes or possums or other predators that don't eat the chickens, but really enjoy the eggs. And actually chickens themselves can become egg eaters. So they may be eating their own eggs, or someone else in the flock may be eating them. If they're free ranging, they may be laying outside of the nest box. So they may be laying perfectly well, but they've decided that they've found a new place to start laying. Or it could be the time of year. So I tend to get these calls a lot in the late fall when day length is really shortening. And it could be that she's just kind of shut down production. You may need to add a light, or just accept that this is a time of year that egg production is going to slow down. The other big one we get is the age of the hen. So this shows her first year, which is going to be her most productive year, which we'll call 100%. And you can see the decline. So by the time she's 9 years of age, she's giving you about 25% of what her initial productivity is. So it's a pretty steady decline of production, which is, so when they get to be, that 4 years, 5 years, and you're looking at she's laying half of what she used to, that's very normal. And some breeds, I've seen some that just completely stop, or they may give you an egg every once in a while. This is for a heavy laying breed, but some just kind of go through henopause and they're done. So you may get the odd egg every once in a while, but some just really cut down on production quite a bit. Sometimes it can be a sign of improper nutrition, so either too much or too little of a nutrient. Management mistakes is another big one. So if they're out of food or water, they may stop laying. Sometimes you also see this after they've been frightened for some reason. So maybe there's been a predator attack and everybody stops laying because they're just kind of freaked out. I had a client once who called, and we finally figured out it was every time the grandchildren visited, the hens all went on strike for about a week afterwards. And it was because they were terrified of children being chased around. So they would stop laying for about a week after the grandkids visited. And then sometimes it can be a sign of parasites and disease. Most often when folks call me, they want to look at this one first, that, my hen stopped laying, does she have a disease? And it absolutely can be a sign of that, but it's more likely time of year, age of hens are the things that I see more often. And then we look at parasites and disease. So the last thing I want to cover before I let you guys go is what are our options for selling eggs? So typical backyard production, if you have a hen, you're going to look at getting about 17 to 20 dozen eggs per hen per year. Of course, that's going to vary quite a bit based on the breed of the animal, their age, what kind of conditions you're raising them in, and then the length of days or the time of year. But that, maybe you're someone who really likes a lot of eggs, or maybe that's way more eggs than you can eat. Or maybe this is something you want to get into as a business. So what are your options? For a long time, whether you had a couple of hens or millions of hens, you were held to the same standards. And that made it very difficult for small scale folks to legally sell their eggs. Fortunately, Florida has stepped up and created what they call the Limited Poultry and Egg Barn Operation License. And this allows smaller producers to sell eggs under certain conditions legally. And I'm going to go over some of the real quick and dirty side of it, but again, on your resource list, it goes into a lot more in depth as to what's allowed and not allowed. But this is limited to producers who have less than 1,000 hens. And I know that sounds like an awful lot, especially to most backyard people who have 2 or 3 hens. But when you compare this to most commercial laying operations that can have millions of hens, 1,000 is a small producer. This is also limited to fewer than 30 dozen eggs per week. These must be sold within the state of Florida. You could sell your eggs at roadside stands, at farmers markets. You can deliver them to your buyers directly. And you can also sell to hotels and restaurants. They cannot be sold retail, so you couldn't sell to someone who's going to turn around and sell them again. And they can't be sold online. And they can't be sold across state lines either. You have to obtain a permit, and there are specific cleaning requirements for the eggs and labeling requirements, and those documents go into what those are. And there's an inspection that goes on, but it's fairly minimal compared to what you used to be held to. So if you wish to sell eggs, this is a good program to get involved in. And I would certainly be happy to help you make those connections and answer any questions you might have about that, as well as put you in charge with the right person at FDAX to walk you through that. So that brings us, I was able to cram my 2-hour class into 1 hour and 5 minutes. So not quite as good as I'd hoped, but hopefully I at least got your toes wet. Couple take-home messages I hope you took away from this is that backyard chickens are a really fun way to secure your own egg supply, but it's not easier or less expensive than purchasing eggs from the grocery store. So some people want to get them because they think this will be an easy alternative, or they'll save money versus buying eggs. And that's typically not the case. So if you're looking to save money from buying eggs, that you'll be unlikely to do that. But if you want to have chickens, there's a number of other really good reasons to do that. And it can be, like I said, a really fun and rewarding way to have a secure food supply of eggs in your own backyard. But make sure that you fully understand what you're getting into before you get started. So starting with asking those questions and making sure that you're allowed to have them, and that it's the right fit for your situation, and that you're prepared to care for them, and that it's a commitment that you want to make. I will beg you guys, on that resource sheet, there is also a survey that is emailed out. Ordinarily, and when you come to our live classes, it is a paper survey, and I joke about blocking the door and not letting you out until you give me the survey. And that's because, our bottom line is not profit. Our bottom line is teaching and measuring learning. And so the way that we prove that is by having you guys take our surveys. And this is the way that we can measure and show that we're doing something that's worthwhile. So if you enjoyed this class, if you didn't enjoy this class, it's a very short survey. I think I put 4 questions. You just have to click the link. It'll take you 2 seconds. I just ask that you please do that. If you do not see that email, you can email Wanda and she will send it out again if you have any trouble getting to that. And then that is my email. It is horseyGirl@ufl.edu. So if you have any specific questions that, and I will open up the chat box in a second to look at them and see what else is there. But if you have any specific questions that are not addressed today, or other things that you would like, you are more than welcome to send me an email. And let's see what else we've got here.
Susan March wants to know, can you help her with sourcing silkies?
Yes, I think I can. If you could copy that email for me, Wanda. Actually, our 4-H agent here has silkies, so I think I can make you a connection pretty easily. That'll be easy to do. Okay, so Miriam, we do have a small ruminant webinar coming up soon, and I will send you that. It's actually my colleagues and I with CFLAG, which is Central Florida Livestock Agents Group. We normally put on a small ruminant conference every year, live and in person. So we have pivoted to turn it into a webinar. So I will send that out. If I will get your email address from Ms. Wanda and send that out to you. I think it's going to be an all-day thing, but those will be recorded as well. So you can watch those at your own time if you are not interested. But I'm glad I'm seeing a lot of you said you learned a lot. I'm glad. It's fun to teach. And I do hope that please take the survey and tune in next time. I think Brooke is back on again next week with the our Growing Together from a Distance program. But we really appreciate you guys being here and being patient with us as we all learn this new technology. So I hope you guys all have a great 3-day weekend and are staying safe and well and washing your hands and keeping your spirits up. So with that, we will go ahead and sign off.